Our next presenter is a religious scholar who has served as the senior pastor for Mount Enon Baptist Church in Clinton, Maryland since 2004. During this time, the congregation has grown to almost 9,000 members. He is founder and president of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality and a board member of the Parents Television Council and the National Action Network. He is also a member of the Society of Biblical Literature at Morehouse College Board of Preachers and the NAACP. He has appeared on and been profiled in national media and was featured in the documentary The New Black. Please welcome Rev Delman Coates.
You can hear me? Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Right. Good. Well, I am so thrilled and excited to be with you again this morning for the second year, to see so many familiar faces and friends and hopefully new friends. We are on a journey together to make our society a better place. And we know that we cannot have a just society without a just money system.
Right.
And so this is the foundational issue, regardless of your particular pet issue, whether it's environmental justice, whether it's criminal justice reform, education, healthcare, Social Security, taxes, reducing taxes, whatever your issue is, the foundation of it all begins with the money system. So I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm using as a title for my talk, Moral Man, Immoral Money. And I am troping off of Reinhold Niebuhr's book titled Moral Man, Immoral Society, in which Niebuhr argues that individual morality is intrinsically incompatible with collective life, thus making social and political conflict inevitable, according to Niebuhr. Niebuhr further discusses our inability to imagine the realities of collective power, the brutal behavior of human collectives of every sort, and ultimately how individual morality can mitigate the persistence of social immorality. So Niebuhr is wrestling with the interaction between individual morality and social immorality. And so humanity is endowed by nature, according to Niebuhr, with organic relations to his fellow men. I'd like to think that includes women for Niebuhr. Humanity is endowed with a natural impulse that prompts him to consider the needs of others even when they compete with his own. And so a monetary interpretation of history invites us, however, I want to suggest, to consider the fact that both our individual and social morality are governed by the structural monetary scarcity at the foundation of our debt-based money system, hence my title, Moral Man, Immoral Money. That title I'm using very intentionally to advance the idea that all of our social, political, and economic crises are linked to the money system. And so to that end, the question becomes, what do our major religious traditions, this is what interests me as a historian of religion, as a pastor and clergy leader, what do our major religious traditions have to say about the money system? I think one of Stephen's great contributions in The Lost Science of Money is the reminder that the major religions of the world played a key role historically in restricting the ability of moneylenders who would become bankers in destabilizing society. They did that through their position on usury. I think Stephen was incredibly helpful in reminding us that usury is more than just excessive interest. This perspective ignores macro usury, or usury at the macroeconomic level, which Stephen was very particular about noting in the lost science of money. And the immoral manipulation of money was a position that many of our major religions regarded as sin or unethical or unjust. It was found in, it's a position found in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And even if the Judeo-Christian traditions have given up their historic positions on usury, but it tends to be maintained in Islamic economics today. Stephen reminds us that despite the historic position against macro usury, that somewhere around the 16th century, the church in particular gave up its historic stance against the immoral manipulation of money. This stance changed mainly because people distorted the nature and definition of usury. And so as a Christian pastor and faith leader, I want to play a role over the course of my ministry, particularly as a function of being introduced to monetary reform and to the American Monetary Institute. I want to play a role in challenging faith leaders within my own tradition and other faith leaders to reclaim a theology of economics and an ethical critique of the current money system so that we can have a more just society. What can we do to help encourage faith leaders I've been wrestling with to reclaim this historic position against macro usury and reclaim the theology of economics that has really been at the foundation of many of these major religions of the world? To that end, I've been rereading the account of Jesus' overturning the tables of the money changers that is often quoted and reread every year in Christian houses of worship during Passion Week. I want to encourage you to see my article in the Huffington Post from April of this year entitled Jesus and the Money Changers, Monetary Reform and the Future of Social Justice, something like this. This account provides an opportunity to reconnect with the economic justice roots at the foundation of, in my tradition, a Judeo-Christian tradition. Each of the Christian Gospels record this rather provocative act of Jesus cleansing the Jerusalem temple by overturning the tables of the money changers who had set up shop in the temple precinct to facilitate the buying of sacred animals that were required for worship. Most commentators give a pietistic interpretation of this act, and they assume that Jesus is outraged by the mere presence of business or commercial activity in the temple precinct. Since the temple is the place of prayer, so the traditional pietistic interpretation goes, the commercial activity should be reserved for another location. So their view is that Jesus is upset by the location or the place of the commercial activity. This view obscures our understanding of Jesus' concern and prevents us from relating that concern to the economic justice issues that we face today. It implies that Jesus would have been fine with the activity of the money changers had it taken place in another quarter of the city, just not in the house of prayer. This interpretation fails to critically examine what Jesus means when he says the money changers have turned the temple into a den of robbers, a description that belies a concern about the location of the activity and is more a judgment about the nature of the activity taking place. How might we better understand the substance of Jesus' critique of the money changers, and is it possible to use that understanding as a means towards addressing similar economic practices today? And so, by way of background, for those unfamiliar with the broader context of what's taking place, those celebrating Passover in Jerusalem were required to offer animals for sacrifice in the temple. Since the religion of the Jews at the time forbade usage of pagan images on coins that were used to purchase those animals, devotees from Rome, Greece, and other cities throughout the empire could not use their local currencies to purchase animals in the temple. Instead, devotees had to convert their local coins into what the Hebrew Bible calls the sanctuary shekel of the temple. The money changers were given an exclusive monopoly by the religious elite to convert their foreign currencies possessed by the worshipers into the required shekel of the temple, or the sanctuary shekel. By Jesus' day, money changers seized their monopoly on the supply of the temple coin and began to charge a fee for their exchange services. They, along with the priests, profited tremendously from their exclusive monopoly on the control and issuance of the temple coin. The sanctuary shekel was the required medium of exchange for participating in the sacred rituals of the temple, but it was also the medium of social and economic power as well. Since there is no indication in the Hebrew Bible that a fee or interest was to be charged in order to obtain the sanctuary shekel, it appears that the money changers and the priests were taking advantage of their ability to control the temple's money system. As merely a medium of exchange, there was no need for the sanctuary shekel to be exchanged for profit. But the priests and the money changers abused this power to exploit the people, leaving worshipers in more debt and economically burdened after they left for Passover than they were when they came. The unjust manipulation of money in what the Hebrew Bible and other major religions and philosophies of the world is what we call usury, what Stephen called macro usury. It is more than charging excessive interest. It is rooted in the idea that money, a simple, inanimate medium of exchange, should not be able to make money in and of itself. With hundreds of thousands of worshipers in Jerusalem for the religious observance of Passover, the money changers and priests stood to profit handsomely from their monopoly of the temple's money. Without performing any productive labor for the community, without investing in any commercial activity, the sanctuary shekel came into existence as a debt to make more money. The temple's money system was especially burdensome for the poor, as the Gospels tell us that some worshipers had to purchase doves, the animal of choice for the poor who were not able to purchase more expensive lambs and cattle that were offered for sacrifice. Jesus' biting critique that the priests and the money changers had made the temple a den of robbers is about the nature of the commercial activity and not about the location of that activity. The unjust manipulation of money enabled those who issued the money to receive an unearned economic benefit for the mere privilege of issuing the temple's money, the sanctuary shekel. They profited not from building, working, or creating anything of communal value, but merely from issuing the money that people were forced to use in order to participate in the temple's economy. Standing within the tradition of the Hebrew Bible's opposition to usury, Jesus is overturning the tables of the money changers is a prophetic challenge to the immoral manipulation of money that leads to the economic exploitation of the masses as a means of enriching those who control the issuance of money. This understanding challenges us to think of ways in which certain monetary practices today unfairly enrich those who control the issuance of money. In his first apostolic exhortation, Pope Francis addressed the laws of competition that have created, quote, an economy of exclusion and inequality, unquote. His analysis of the way in which, quote, the idolatry of money, unquote, has affected the ability of nations to care for the most vulnerable among us challenges us to return to an ethical approach to economics that favors humanity rather than prioritizes the profit-making goals of the market. Quote, just as the commandment, thou shalt not kill, sets a clear limit in order to safeguard the value of human life, Pope Francis says, today we also have to say thou shalt not to an economy of exclusion and inequality. Such an economy, he says, kills. Money must serve and not rule, unquote. There are many similarities between the debt-based money systems of the world today and the kind of monetary profiteering that Jesus challenged during his own day. An understanding of the modern mechanics of money creation makes it abundantly evident that the creation of money as a debt is the underlying systemic mechanism that causes and creates the very economy of exclusion and inequality about which Pope Francis speaks. Pope Francis writes, quote, debt and the accumulation of interest also make it difficult for countries to realize the potential of their own economies and keep citizens from enjoying their real purchasing power, unquote. For those concerned about economic injustice in the world today, it is important to develop conceptual clarity around why the major religions and philosophies of the world found debt-based money so troubling for the maintenance of social peace and economic stability. Our debt-based money system is the underlying systemic mechanism that causes and creates the very economy of exclusion and inequality due to the structural scarcity that's at the foundation of our monetary system. As I just mentioned, this quote where Pope Francis says, debt and the accumulation of interest make it difficult for countries to realize the potential of their own economies and keep citizens from enjoying their own purchasing power, I would suggest is rooted within an understanding that debt-based money creates the kind of structural scarcity around which we all should be concerned. For those concerned about this injustice, it's important for us to understand what I had mused about in other settings, to understand what is the root cause of economic injustice in the world today. Dr. King, quoting Victor Hugo in response to the civil and social unrest of his day, stated, if a soul lives in darkness, sins will be committed. But the guilty one is not the one who commits the sins, but the one who causes the darkness, unquote. What King is doing here is he is advancing a theory of change that challenges us to think about the structural and systemic causes of injustice rather than just treating symptoms. Attempting to understand what I want to call the archaeology of injustice, to sort of quote Foucault in talking about the archaeology of knowledge. Attempting to understand the archaeology or the origins of injustice is the key, the foundational key to solving all of our nation's social and economic ills. Additionally, considering the archaeology of injustice or consideration of the irreducible core of injustice can play a valuable role in providing a unifying meta-narrative for those of goodwill today, whose energies tend to be divided across various social justice issues, whether it's anti-poverty work, education, mass incarceration, environmental justice, immigrant rights, healthcare, voting rights, taxation, the list goes on and on. Because those concerned about justice are fragmented in various silos, our effectiveness against the forces that cause inequality is weakened. As a means of unifying those of us concerned about advocating for the least of these, I want to suggest my talk seeks to explain, and really I'll forego explaining, because we are here because we understand the way in which debt-based money is at the irreducible core. It is the irreducible core issue that causes injustice. And it is why people of conscience and conviction must aim to advocate for an alternative money system that serves, says Pope Francis, rather than oppresses humanity. And so I want to advance the following foundational claim. All of our social and economic ills in society are a function of the nation's debt-based money system. Therefore, if we hope to address today's social and economic ills, we must bring an end to the debt-based money system. Attempts to address today's social ills that leave the debt-based money system in place may be well-intentioned, but will ultimately fail to eradicate society of these social and economic injustices. We must therefore fix the root cause of the problem if we want to have a more just and a more equitable society. And so the fundamental principle for justice-seeking people must be, in order to have a just society, we must have a just money system. My work, and I believe it will define the rest of my work for the end of my days, is to commit to the task of socializing these ideas with people across a range of faith traditions, because faith leaders all across the country and all across the world can be incredible allies in our monetary reform work. My work will commence on this in April of next year formally in a campaign I plan to begin. Bob wanted me to talk about my future work, and a campaign I'm planning to begin entitled The New Abolitionism. The New Abolitionism, which is really not new, right? I'm just using this for heuristic purposes.
It really is abolitionism.
It is abolitionism, right? It's not new, but it is abolitionism because our society today is in bondage, quite frankly, to debt and interest. Think about it. The average American works 40 to 50 hours a week. Why? To pay interest on debt-based money, on a mortgage, on a car note, on a school loan, on a department store credit card. I was sharing this campaign and this monetary reform issue, Stephen's book, The American Monetary Institute, with a leading pastor in the country who was so moved by the knowledge that's available in the law science of money and the monetary reform issue, that he shared with me this anecdote, which I think conveys how we are indeed in bondage on this debt-based money issue. So he says to me that his church built a $30 million church, sanctuary, $30 million church. And they have been paying the mortgage on that building for about 8 years now. And over the course of the past 8 years, they have paid $18 million on that mortgage. And the principal has only been reduced by 2.5, maybe 3 million.
Exactly.
And so to hear me and to hear us talk about the way in which people are literally drowning in interest payments in a world in which it doesn't have to be this way. We are all challenged to help people understand the way in which the current money system is really keeping all of us in bondage. And so I am launching an effort to socialize these ideas with other faith leaders. It's going to launch on April the 4th through the 6th at my church, where I'm bringing together faith leaders, civil rights leaders, to begin to be socialized about the importance of monetary reform as a part of our social and economic justice work. We are having a pre-conference symposium on October the 31st of this year at my church. Certainly those of you who are here today are invited to attend, and certainly I can make sure we get information out. The morning session symposium is entitled The Mechanics of Modern Money, and we are bringing together folks within the industry. We have Congressman Alan Grayson, who's on the Financial Services Committee. We have folks from the Federal Reserve, from National Bankers Association, and the Treasury. And before I know many of you are like, oh, these folks will never get on monetary reform. I understand that, and I don't expect them to. But the point is to establish a common set of assumptions about the existence of the current money system. Because there's so many misunderstandings about money, even among, politicians and, even economists. If you ask 10 people on the street, where does the bank get the money for your mortgage? 11 of them will say, from the vault downstairs. They assume that banks are intermediaries of existing deposits. And so a part of the work that I want to do is to begin mainstreaming some of these ideas by developing a common set of assumptions about the existence of the current system as the predicate and foundation for them proposing the kinds of reforms we are all for. So that morning we're having a morning panel entitled The Mechanics of Modern Money. And what I'll do is I'll send out a link, because I believe we're going to try to stream it so that those of you who are not in Maryland or in the DC area can watch online. I'll make sure we get that link out to Jamie and others so that you can tune in. Clinton, Maryland, right outside of Washington, DC. That afternoon will be an interfaith symposium where we're bringing together Christian, Jewish, and Islamic scholars to talk about usury and the theology of economics from their tradition. I'm really excited about that. During the lunch panel, I will be doing a book review and summary of Joseph Huber's Sovereign Money. He was unable to Skype in or come in, and I may try to record a conversation with Dr. Huber, but at the very least, I'll be doing a summary on his book, Sovereign Money, which is really incredible. If you haven't read it, it's just really, really great there. So the New Abolitionism is a campaign and an effort that I'm really excited about to begin to socialize these ideas with faith leaders, civil rights leaders, and others, to begin to expand the echo chamber around the ideas that every year we come to share today. It's also a part of several tactics that I think are critical and important for furthering Stephen's work. I think that certainly we all know that changes in legislation represents our ultimate goal. But in order to get there, the pathway is going to be, we have to do more education. We have to expand the knowledge base among so many in our society today. I'm also working on, as a part of our campaign, a short film about money reform, and I'm also working on a very short book entitled The New Abolitionism, Monetary Reform in the Future of Human Rights. I'm indebted to many of you in this room for providing the intellectual foundation for this kind of work. I'm also very actively involved in lobbying, however, not lobbying Congress, but lobbying thought leaders or mid-tier influencers around the country who have platforms that can further socialize these ideas with folks within their constituency. I want to suggest that this may be one tactic for a cohort of individuals who come to this conference to begin coming together to meet with influencers and leaders around the country who have institutional base and who have a platform for further socializing. these ideas with others. And so, lastly, I just want to suggest that if the NEED Act is to be passed, then those of us who are concerned about monetary reform will need to think about the role of money in politics, because as long as the bankers can buy the politicians, those politicians are probably not going to pass legislation to oppose the bankers. And so we have to have, in my mind, a conversation about the role of money in politics, as it is a kind of allied issue, in my opinion, as well as protecting the right to vote. Well, that's the end of my talk. I think I went over my 30 minutes. And thank you so much. Entertain questions? Yeah, so you said you wanted me to entertain any questions or thoughts? Yes. Jamie and Bob want me to entertain any questions? Yes, I see.
I have a question, and that is. Okay. My question is, you've made the assertion that the debt-based monetary system is a root cause to all of these social evils.
Yes.
What's the connection between that and racism?
Yes, very good question. I believe that in a debt-based money system that's based on structural scarcity, that you need discourses of difference to determine who's gonna have and who's not gonna have. So I believe that all these various discourses of difference, racism, sexism, Islamophobia, ageism, ableism, all these other isms, are discourses of difference to determine the allocation of resources in a debt-based money system. And while monetary reform is not a magic bullet and does not answer all issues, I believe that it creates the conditions that makes these discourses of difference less necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to that, and thank you so much for your talk, because the book that really helped open my eyes on a lot of the racism and the economic system had roots in American history was Roger Wilkins' book, Jefferson's Pillow, where he talked about how there were Irish and Scotch indentured servants and some of the first black Africans that were imported for the labor, because the labor was what they really needed, were indentured also, and many became free. And it was only after Bacon's Rebellion where the white people who weren't the owners and the African Americans actually rioted and burned down the governor's home, that Virginia enacted legislation in 1690 that first used the term white and African in legislation. It was the first instance that had ever occurred in history, and that it was primarily to divide the white from the black, to set them up in opposition with each other to protect the economic power of the white landowners that were there. And his book is much, much more in-depth and multi-layered, and examines, how Jefferson, for himself, was, a slave, had a enslaved concubine, and still wrote so masterfully on the context of individual liberty and freedom and rights, that it's all woven into the economic system.
I know they're arranging. I saw their handwriting.
Let's search it out first. Let's search it first.
Thanks very much for the talk. I wanted to ask you,